So to start us off, I just kind of wanted to put up our cohort this year. Here you'll see all the applicants where at the top here is where everyone is going. And at the bottom, you'll see kind of where everyone matched. Or sorry, where everyone rotated at the bottom and the top where everyone matched. And something you'll kind of notice that's going to be a theme we'll touch on later is that generally for majority of our class where most people rotated is where they ended up matching. So something to keep in mind when thinking about away rotations. Again, here's the remaining 5 of us or 10 of us total who matched this year. So to talk about the application has several components. The first off is the biographical information. Then you'll have your personal statement, the MSPE, if you haven't heard of that before. It's kind of a summary statement of your time here at Rutgers and throughout medical school. It's a summary of all your clinical grades, your rotation reviews, not just the grade of like honors, pass, high pass, etc. It'll be a summary of kind of your evaluations. And then also any extracurriculars that are notable if you're in AOA or Global Humanism, Honors Side, or anything like that is all kind of summarized in the MSPE, and the school puts that together. There will be areas for you to put in your research work, volunteer experiences, and we'll talk about how that goes in. One interesting thing this year is that in the past, there used to be a hobbies and interests section in the application. That went away for our class, and then now it's coming back for this year. It'll be a standalone item. Obviously, your letters of recommendation, and then anything else that's additional, whether it's a personal statement, a supplemental application, essay, video, that certain programs will require. So something that was implemented recently and will be staying is that they will ask about geographic preferences by either region of the country or by urban or rural setting. There will be information out of the 10 experiences that you put into your application. There's going to be an option to select the 3 most meaningful or impactful experiences. And signaling, which has now become a regular part of the application. Orthopedic surgery allows you to have 30 signals total. And we'll talk about kind of the impact of signaling in the next couple slides. So we'll get into that later. So the general timeline, September 6th is when the application officially opens and you can begin to submit your application. This again was for our application cycle. The next year's application timeline isn't fully out yet, but it's almost always kind of the same set of dates. You'll have about almost till the end of the month to submit your application. And September 27th for us is when residency programs were able to download and view our application. If you submitted after the 21 or after the 27th, your application is considered late. So you should, honestly, you get that in much earlier, and usually people don't worry about that. Then it's kind of a waiting game. November 13th has been Universal Interview Offer Day, where majority, not all programs will release their interview invites. And then throughout November into February, that's interview season sporadically. Mostly, I think people started in December, and then there was some time off towards the end with the holidays. And then I think the bulk for almost all of us was in January / early February, if there was. February is when you're going to be working on your rank list after all your interviews are in and done. February 28th for us was when we had to submit our rank list. And then obviously match week, Monday, did you match or not? And then Fridays, you'll find out where you matched. If you want a more in-depth kind of explanation about the match process, there's good videos online about kind of how the algorithm works and all of that. We won't touch on that here, but it's out there if you're interested. So to get into the kind of the crux of our presentation is some of the data from this year's application cycle and cohort. So the total number of programs is 218 this year. It's no change from 2023. There were a couple programs that recently got accredited, but that happened at the end of 2023. So technically there's no change. The number of PGY1 spots or total spots in the country was 916, up by 17 from the previous year. The total number of unfilled positions in the entire country was 1, usually 0. So honestly, the fact that there was 1 was pretty surprising. And the number of spots out of those 916 that went to US senior MD applicants was 726 or almost 80%, again, up from 2023. So one thing that you'll kind of recognize soon is that there's a difference in the number of ERAS applicants versus the NRMP applicant. Just because you apply into orthopedics doesn't guarantee that you're going to get an interview, and you can only rank on the NRMP once you have at least 1 interview. So this year there was about 1,700 applicants, slightly up from 2023. However, the number of applicants who were able to put at least rank 1 orthopedic program was about 1,492. And again, the difference between US MD seniors was 1,200 versus 1,000. So it's not a guarantee that just because you applied into orthopedics that you'll necessarily be ranking an orthopedic program. The average number of applications, and this is something that we really like to highlight, is for applicants this year was about 62, for MDs was about 66. That's down almost 15 to 20 applications per applicant since last year, and a lot of this has to do with signaling. We'll touch on this later, but the take-home message about signaling is that securing an interview outside of your signal is almost impossible, with the exception of some programs who are not participating in signals, or those who kind of extend and read applications outside of the signaling. But the majority of programs nowadays won't download any applications outside of those who signaled them. And that's just reflected in the number of programs applicants are applying to. Also, the number of applications programs are receiving is also down by almost 100 applications per program since last year. And this is only year 2 signaling. I expect that this trend is going to continue for some time. So the match rate for orthopedic surgery nationally this year was about 53%, slightly down from last year by less than 1 or a couple of decimal points. In the NRMP, again, also down. Again, that's for people who were ranked at least 1 orthopedic program. For Robert Wood Johnson MS4s, the trend is kind of similar to last year. We are at 77%, 10 out of 13 applicants that we are aware of matched into orthopedic surgery. And just something to note is that obviously, if you look at the bottom of this chart, the 2021, 2022, there's classes were kind of affected by COVID and the limited number of away rotations. And since that has gone up, things are kind of normalizing back in our school. So to go more into the survey that we sent out to this year's cohort, we sent the survey to 13 applicants. 10 of those 13 responded. 10 of those people were matched. We have no data from the unmatched applicants. And 10 first-time applicants matched into orthopedics. So again, out of all 10 of us who matched, this was all our first cycle applying into orthopedics. So in terms of the academic statistics, before I get into this, the next couple of slides, you'll see like this red box on the bottom. Those are national averages. However, the NRMP releases these biannually, so it's every 2 years. These numbers are from 2022, and so they're going to release this year, but sometime around May. So if you're going to look at the national averages, just kind of take those with a grain of salt, is that they're a little outdated. I always found that it was more helpful to focus on our cohort and our students because, that's where you're applying from. That's the numbers that are going to be most applicable to you guys. We'll focus on the 2024 again. You could go back and look through these numbers if you'd like. Most of us, again, especially those who didn't have to take a research year or anything like that, passed step 1. We didn't have scores. One person who did from a previous class, the score is listed there. In terms of our step 2 average was 257. And again, average, the ranges are in the parentheses. ranging anywhere from 240 to 267. All of us, even including those who took research years, took step 2 immediately after third year. In the past, people were submitting or taking step 2 kind of before or after submitting their application sometime throughout fourth year. But ever since step 2 went to pass fail, now the standard is that you'll be applying with your step 2. So in terms of rotation grades, this year, in terms of the survey, not everyone had to answer every question. So if you see, we have 10 applicants, but if you see some numbers missing, maybe those questions, some people didn't feel like including.
Yeah.
But in general, out of the people that answered, one person had 5 honors on their third year clerkships. 6 of us had 6 honors on our third year clerkships. 70% for 7 of us were inducted into AOA, 3 in junior AOA, which happens at the end of third year, 4 as a senior AOA, which also happens sometimes in the summer, but maybe a couple months later, but would also happen prior to your application getting submitted. So it still goes in that you get to put that on your app. And the Gold Humanism Honor Society, we had 1 inductee. In terms of the ERAS experiences, so this year was unique in that we could only submit 10 experiences total, and that is something that will be staying for future classes. And I think it's different if you're looking at these numbers and comparing to past years. Our averages and our numbers are down again because we were limited to just those meaningful experiences. And sometimes there's ways to kind of combine certain experiences if they kind of fit together under one. But ERAS is really doing this, and the goal of this is to, prevent this application overload where, if you're reading applications, you're not reading 15, 20 experiences per applicant and people are just listing anything. It's really focusing on, those most meaningful experiences to you that you really want to portray about who you are, the kind of application that you have. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not, about being involved in 20 different things. It's more so just kind of building on those experiences that you already have and focusing on those. So work experiences, we had about 1.8, again, from 0 to 4. Volunteer experiences was between 2 to 3. Research experiences was also around 2.5 experiences on average. There was really not that much of a difference between those who took a research year versus those who didn't. In fact, probably the most research experiences listed was about 3 on any one of the applications total. And again, for us, because we didn't have a standalone hobby section, a lot of the advice that we got is that hobbies kind of define who you are and you get to tell the reader more about you than just kind of like the numbers and the data and the research and the work and all that. So 7 out of 10 of us chose to utilize one of our experiences for hobbies. And I think that was pretty important. And but again, won't matter for this year's application cycle, at least because it's coming back as a standalone section. Changes to ERAS over the past couple of years, again, 30 signals. There's geographic preference now that you could choose to indicate, or you could choose to say you have no preference whatsoever. And then the 10 experiences that I just touched on, you could select 3 out of those 10 to be your most meaningful experiences. And then the standalone hobby section, which is coming back for next year. Going more specifically into research experiences and numbers, we kind of broke this down into students who took a research year versus those who didn't. And you can see the number of manuscripts, poster presentations, and podiums. 8 of our class didn't take a research year. 2 of the match cohort did. There's definitely a difference, and between the published manuscripts, you can see almost 16 on average for those 2 students versus 6 on average for us who didn't take a research year. And again, with posters, that kind of ended up being around the same. And podiums also similar. It was more so publishing manuscripts because, as you can imagine, that takes a longer amount of time. So if you have an extra year, it's more likely that some of those projects that you've been working on have made it to publication. In terms of away rotations and letters of recommendation, I think one notable thing is that almost all of us, actually all of us did at least 3 away rotations, the max being 4 on average. That is definitely up from past years. Last year, the cap was 3. Most people did around 2 or, 2.5 on average, again, statistically. That's because, again, away rotations, it's the summary, which kind of I alluded to earlier in the presentations, that most of us matched where we did an away rotation, and that's gonna always be the standard regardless of how this application cycle changes, is that you'll get to know a program the most and they'll get to know you the most if you spend 3 or 4 weeks with them rotating. In terms of letters of recommendation, now that we've been doing more away rotations, students got slightly less home letters, on average 2.3, slightly down from the past couple of years. But on the contrary, they got more letters of recommendation from outside institutions, almost 3 compared to past years. In terms of the application process, we had 0 dual applicants this year. Our average was kind of consistent with that national average of about 60 applications or 60 programs applied to per applicant. On average, we got about 14 interview offers, but again, the range was from 5 to 26. So, and again, these were all people that matched into orthopedics who responded to the survey. So even someone who quote unquote got a low number of interviews, 5, was able to make the most out of those 5 interviews. And I remember last year, this was kind of similar when they pointed out that someone with 4 interviews was still able to match. So it truly, you'll hear a lot about like the magic number of interviews, but things don't always work out that way. And no matter how many interviews are kind of on the table in front of you, if you make the most of them, you still have a really good shot. And all it takes is one, honestly, to match. One interview, one good, day, and that's what it takes. So kind of take this stuff with a grain of salt. Mean number of interviews attended was about 13. And the mean number of ranks on the NRMP, again, also around 13 to 14. The average number of interviews that we got outside of our 30 signals per applicant was less than 1. And we tried to collect this data for you in case, you wanted to kind of play your chances with programs who offered us, interviews outside of signaling, and maybe you write these down, we'll have access to this later. If you're gonna apply to, programs outside of the signaling, maybe these might be worth it, but again, that's a conversation you should have with a mentor, and we'll get into that later.
You should definitely apply to those, even if you don't signal them.
Fair point, that's why we included them.
That's why we're giving you this.
Okay. Moving on, so the rank list and the match. Most of us matched on average to our second ranked program. The range was from 1 through 4, so everyone this year got within their top 4 programs on their rank list. 5 matched at their number 1 program, 1 person at their number 2, and so on. And then again, 8 of the 10 of us matched at a place where we either did a home rotation or an away rotation. So significant number of us chose to rank and ended up matching at programs that we knew having rotated through. In the hindsight, we asked our cohort the number of applications you submitted. Almost unanimously, everyone thought they were too many. Again, that's reflected by the number of interviews we got and how limited the interview offers are outside of the signaling. The number of interviews people felt like, on average were just right. Our average again was around 13 to 14 interviews offered. And then this year we asked applicants what their perceived greatest strength of their application was. And I think it's pretty interesting here is that 8 of us thought letters of recommendation were pretty important. And I think that the numbers speak for themselves, and we'll kind of touch on this later. There's almost unanimously where you end up, people will ask you on interviews and kind of allude to your letters of recommendation, especially if you got a really strong letter. I think that speaks more sometimes than the numbers that are on paper. They kind of speak to your overall character and work ethic, et cetera. Clinical grades were a strong suit of this year's cohort. And again, research experience is also around 6 of us Other things that were kind of important were step scores. Again, you always hear about step being the magical thing and it takes what's the step score. Only 3 of us thought that, our step score was really what got us here. Leadership positions similarly, nobody really alluded to their volunteer experiences as being a greatest strength. And then some people thought, or mentioned a couple other things that weren't listed. One being military service and another one being, unique hobbies that they listed on their application. This data again is 2 years ago, kind of national averages comparing matched and unmatched. You could see kind of the difference in the number of ranks, that which also alludes to the number of interviews you received, 12 versus 5. And then step scores kind of between the 2 cohorts, research experiences, AOA, things like that. You can kind of go through this on your own and compare, but again, it's kind of a little bit outdated and it also doesn't really speak to our cohort either. This is a graph that you'll see often about that magical number of interviews or ranks on the NRNP and your probability of matching. What's important to note is that, obviously the more interviews you receive and the more ranks that you have, the higher likelihood of matching. But one thing that kind of happens that you'll plateau off, again, this is 2 years old, but around like 13 or 14, you can see there's a steep drop off in that if you had 13 versus you had 20, there's really not as great of a difference in the probability of matching versus let's say like 2 versus 10. So there's usually some sort of sweet spot where after that it really doesn't change much. And one thing that's also important to note on a graph like this is that you look at someone, 20 interview offers and 20 ranks, and the probability of matching is still not 100%. You could look great on paper, you could get all the interviews, but if you show up on interview day and you act a certain way or not impressing people, or you portray yourself in a certain way, it doesn't matter what you look like and your grades and all of that. For the 25 interviews you receive, nothing is guaranteed until it's kind of set in stone. So it's a lot more than the number of interviews. And I know that's hard for you guys to believe, but I think all of us can truly appreciate this now being on the other side of it. So don't focus too much on this like magical number per se. That's kind of what I have to share in terms of the statistics. Karen's gonna come and speak to you guys about some general advice that we put from this year's class as well as, the past couple of years. And then we'll get into some more questions and do our Q&A with the panel later on.
Okay, so I want to preface this by saying, advice is good. Talk to a lot of people, talk to residents, talk to like previous classmates, all that stuff, but also at the same time, take what everyone says with a little bit of a grain of salt because people's experiences just are really, really different. One person who had terrible grades, whatever, matched up this fantastic program might have matched it because of some connections or because they're just awesome. And like, they'll be like, oh, it doesn't matter, doesn't matter, doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that, like you just have to kind of take people's advice a little bit with a grain of salt. But that's if you try to like compile people's advice and kind of come up with some common themes. So hopefully it's a little bit more helpful, but just like kind of keep that at the back of your mind whenever you're talking to people. So a lot of the questions that are, a lot of people ask about what kind of resources are really helpful. I think pretty much universally we use Netter's concise orthopedic anatomy, ortho bullets, and pocket pins. Just like that's what I see the most often. These are some other ones that I see. You can usually find digital copies of these textbooks. I think I have a few, so I can probably share. So just keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, like with all of medical school, you go what's for you. Mentorship. So mentors can come truly from anywhere. Home rotation obviously is where you're gonna have the biggest chances because you've been here the longest and the residents know you and all that. But away rotations are generally these days especially set up so that you can have mentors. So a lot of times, even if they're doing two-week rotations, they'll kind of assign you to work with one person for 2 weeks so that you have like one person that has known you for the entirety of those 2 weeks instead of bouncing around. Residents are a really, really good resource. With that said, I will say like fives are a little bit, they are more involved in the selection process sometimes, but are also more removed from the application cycle period. So their advice kind of it can be a hit or miss. Alumni, professional organizations, RJOS is a good one if you're a female applicant. So just, keep all of those in mind. Mentors really do matter. They are not only resources, but can be your greatest advocates. So you'll hear this all the time, like, having connection really matters. So if you have a mentor who went to some residency program or, is still somehow or did fellowship or has a lot of strong ties to a program that you're interested in, it's a good idea to talk to them. So picking away rotations, this is something that I really, really, really struggled with. They're important, like you saw, most of us matched up places that we did away rotations. Picking good rotations is not only helpful for getting interviews and good letters of recommendations, but also just getting a good feel for what kind of program you'll like. So I've heard of people doing a few strategies. One is to maximize the interviews that you're getting. So for example, if you're dead set on a certain city, you can do all of your rotations in that city and hopefully get an interview from all of those places. Some people decide to, if they're like a fantastic applicant, or maybe not a fantastic applicant, go to reach programs and hope that, maybe your grades aren't great on paper, but you're an awesome person. And that's how you get those interviews at those top programs that might be, harder if your step score is lower or something like that. Another approach I've heard of is geographic unlocking. So that's where you go to places in different locations and get a letter. So the only way that a program knows that you did an away, the only way that programs know where you did your aways is if you get a letter from that program. So if you're doing that away in November after applications have gone out and you have no letters from it, it won't help you anywhere except for at that specific program. So keep that in mind when you're picking your aways. If you are trying to quote geographically unlock a region, you want to do that rotation a little bit earlier. Another approach that I have seen one that I took personally is exploring different types of programs. So that can vary in terms of program size, location, blue versus white collar, overall reputation or prestige. Again, so when you're picking the rotations, do your research. Websites will start sounding the exact same. They'll talk about how residents are all family or that they love living in the city. So talk to previous classmates, look at where past Robert Wood students have matched, but I will also add a caveat to this, which is don't limit yourself to where Robert Wood people have matched. There are, I think, kind of by word of mouth, some places that won't take Robert Wood or historically have never done that, but that doesn't mean they never will. So if there's a program that you're super, super interested in, do your research, like find out if there's a particular reason for that, or if, maybe just no one has thought of it, and you go, shoot your shot. Another important thing is pick places where you really, really want to match. But be honest with yourself about what's important to you. So I'm talking in terms of where you want to live. If what's important to you, like is prestige, is size important to you, is, be honest with yourself. Another kind of helpful piece of advice we got is to coordinate with classmates. So we personally did that through an Excel sheet and we just basically uploaded where we were thinking of doing our aways. This will obviously change. And an important thing to note is that coordinating with classmates does not mean one person picked this this institution and it's off limits to everyone else. It's more just, I think most of us wanted to be in kind of the Northeast, so between Boston and DC. So it was just helpful to know, okay, well, 7 people are doing this away, so maybe I'll try going for, something else. It's just like a helpful kind of way to pick your aways and coordinate with each other. One last thing is be realistic. If you struggle, with clinical grades or if your step score isn't great, maybe, don't do exclusively the super academic programs that don't take anyone with a low step score, so just kind of like really appraise your application. A good idea is to also talk to a mentor, like have them really look at your full application. At least as much of it as is available at the time that you ask them and kind of ask them to gauge how quote competitive you are. That can be a little bit scary, but would recommend. So after you pick your aways, now you are a sub-I. The most important piece of advice, I think last year Todd gave us he's a 5 now, so it won't be him, but basically the residents from Robertwood gave like a very good PowerPoint on like how to behave at the sub-I. You would be very, very surprised. Like a lot of this seems like common sense to you, but you're gonna go on your ways and you're going to meet people and see people that do some crazy stuff on sub-I. So just be prepared, find case for the day, read up, know your anatomy, know your patient. In clinic, learn the exams, try to be helpful, whether that's setting up the injections or just going in and like talking to them about the HPI, like talking to them, and getting like at least the HPI, asking about allergies, just try to be helpful. Having a really good attitude is really important. Show that you're a team worker, have initiative, be ambitious, be excited, like be genuinely excited to be there. Identify potential letter writers early. So again, a lot of times, or in my experience, a lot of DOAs were set up in such a way that you will work with like one person. And also when you're out and away, the attendings know that you're trying to get a letter. So it is not surprising, for them to hear that you want a letter. So just try to kind of, like have an eye on who would be a good letter writer. Another thing that a lot of people mention is ask around with the residents about who will be a good letter writer. They know who writes strong letters, who will give you good advice. So just keep that in mind. The kind of negative, or not, I don't want to say negative, but the part that I think harder to manage sometimes is this kind of second half, which is you're always being watched. Everything you do is being noticed, even if it doesn't seem like it. That kind of, this isn't meant to like scare you or, make you feel like everyone is judging everything you do, but
They are.
they kind of
They
are.
can
Yeah.
scare you.
Sometimes, they're watching, like if you're, some people complain about like other med students or other residents. Don't do that. Like you don't think like, this was like, I have a friend who was like a resident, she said, we're sitting at the computers, our backs are turned to you, you think we don't hear anything, but like you do hear. So if you're sitting there complaining about a med student that's on that rotation with you, they hear you and they know that you're the kind of person that sits there and talks badly about people you work with. So like, that's the kind of situation you want to avoid. With that said, obviously, if something actually goes wrong, if, someone, I don't know, like actually mistreats you, like there are ways to bring things like that up, but as a general rule, do not complain. Be early, but don't be too early. I've actually heard residents complain about, med students that show up like an hour and a half early and are just sitting there like staring at them, which is not very helpful and kind of annoying. So you want to be early, but we're talking like 10, 15, maximum 30 minutes early. Like do not be that person that shows up 2 hours early and just like stares at them. Definitely know your place. Something you'll hear a lot is you don't want to be, sometimes being noticed is like a bad thing. There's people who are just, if you're like screaming at the top of your lungs, like all day long and people get annoyed, you're getting noticed. A lot of times it's like the hard workers who just keep their head down, work really hard, that get noticed in like the better way. So it's not always a good thing to be the center of attention. And it is sometimes a little bit of a fine line between being like proactive and helpful versus being kind of annoying and, being in people's space. So again, I'm not trying to say this to like scare anyone or make you feel like you're being judged 24/7, but just definitely be aware of your surroundings and try to put your like best foot forward. Okay. So what's important, what's not? So left is obviously things that are important, how well you fit, are you easy to work with? What I've been told is getting every pimping question right is not what's really important. No one will remember you if you get anatomy questions wrong, but they will remember you if you show up late constantly and complain all the time and, do kind of annoying things. With that doesn't mean don't read. Like, obviously we try to get the questions right, but I know I personally would like beat myself up, if I like got basic questions right. But like 90% of the time, they will not remember that you didn't know what an artery was. But again, they will remember if you were like in their way and like actively being annoying. Another thing is, you're not trying to impress everyone. Like, don't bring up your research. Like, if they ask you like, oh, hey, what did you do this weekend? They don't want to hear about, your research. Like, they want to know what you did that weekend. So just kind of be, a normal person. Letters. So there's 2 types of letters, the classic narrative and the standardized e-score. The link is right there. Some programs specify that they want the eSLR, others don't. As what the advice that I got and what I did personally was I sent all my letter writers to eSLR because no one will say we don't want eSLR, at least in my experience, anyone can correct me. So, having the eSLR just so that you can send that out is probably the better, or the safer route to go. Ask for letters early, again, it's not a bad idea to ask kind of like, even a few days in or at the end of the week, you know, I am looking for a letter, just kind of give them the heads up. Don't ask formally at that point, obviously. Follow up, you know, at the end of your time with that person, send them a formal email with the instructions. They obviously, most people know how like the eSLR works, so you'll be fine. The better and longer someone knows you, the stronger the letter. So this is kind of obvious, but, you know, a lot of people will ask about, you know, there's someone really well known, but I've only known them for 2 weeks at this, you know, rotation versus someone that's known me for 3 years, but is not like a super well-known person. The person that knows you better will probably write the better letter, and that will show through. Like, even if it's like the well-known person, their name might be kind of, their name might get you through the door, but they knew you for 2 weeks, so it's not gonna be as, you know, strong of a letter. So if you know, have to choose, the one that, you know, knows you better. Try to get at least one letter from every rotation. Again, it's not always possible, but September is usually the last rotation you can get one. It is really tight though, so if you want, for example, a geographic unlocking letter, September might not be the best time because it will be very rushed. Consider having a letter from someone that's not ortho. This is required by some programs. I personally don't think I applied to any that did that, but just have that in the back of your mind so that it doesn't stop you from applying. The application process, start your personal statement early, update your CV. This is like a general rule, keep everything short and sweet. I've heard of both bullets and small paragraphs being used. I don't think it particularly matters, do whatever feels right to you. Review the application requirements. Some programs do have some kind of different requirements. So again, like on ortho, one program had like a separate link for their supplemental that was due like by a certain date. So just keep track of all those extra requirements and make sure you get that done. Some programs have a minimum or a maximum number of letters. The advice that I've gotten is if the program specifies we want 3 letters, do not send them 4. If they say we want a minimum of 3 letters, you can send them 4, but like just follow the instructions. I don't think they'll like rule you out for this, but just like follow the instructions. Ask friends and mentors to read and critique everything, proofread everything in late times. And you will still probably find a small mistake like a comma, but that's okay. Signals. So Peter obviously briefly touched on this, but we get 30. Some programs have opted not to accept signals. Try to have a variety of programs. I'm talking about like size, location, or not necessarily location, sorry. Size, you know, different levels of kind of competitiveness or prestige. Definitely review that with a mentor. What you want to hear is, hey, you have a good range of programs. Like you don't want, if they tell you, you know, anything other than like you have a good range of programs, you probably want to make some adjustments. Again, these are the programs that offered interviews outside of signaling. I believe Hackensack is a program that didn't accept signals.
Wake didn't either.
And Wake. Interviews, so practice. There are some common interview questions. This is not a comprehensive list by any means. There are lists online all over the place, so just take a quick look at that. The most important one / the one that's easiest to practice is definitely the 1-minute elevator pitch. So just have that down. I'm probably, if you ask me now, I probably could get, I'd say the exact same thing that I said at every single interview because it will happen almost every interview. Interviews tend to be short. I think some of the shortest ones I've had were like 8 minutes. The longest was maybe 15. Time yourself when you practice. Your initial reply should be like maybe a minute or 2 long so that it can be a conversation and not you talking at over 10 minutes. Keep the response brief. Post-interview communication. So letters of intent can be helpful, but depending on the program, depending on where you are on their wrinkles without it, it might not be. Be honest though, and listen to the program's instructions. If a program specifically tells you do not send us post-interview communications, don't do it. It's not going to do you any favors. And this is really, really important. Don't tell more than one program that they are your number one. Program directors do talk, and it's just a really bad look, so don't do that. Okay, we're gonna, move on to the Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, guys, for the presentation. We'll move on to our Q&A session. All right, we need to see the animation.
Should we have everyone like introduce themselves just so that?
Yeah, I was just gonna describe what we're gonna do. So we had a set amount of questions that were submitted by, the students. Some of them have been answered or touched upon during the presentation, but I think we're gonna focus, right now on hearing more kind of personal opinions and your experiences, guys. So yeah, let's start, I could just suggest it with you guys introducing yourself, maybe tell us where you matched, and then we'll move on.
Hi guys, my name is Peter and I'll be staying at Robert Wood.
Yeah, watch out for this guy, because you're intern.
I'm Karen, I'm at Mimo in Brooklyn.
Hi, my name is Usman. I'm headed to University of Maryland. I rotated there.
Hi everyone, my name is Orad, I'm matched at Tufts.
I'm James Chapman, matched at UMass.
I'm Peter Drinker, matched at Illinois Lagoon.
Thank you, guys. So the first question we have is, what do you wish you'd known earlier about the ARIS application?
I think that's good. I wish I knew that the small things kind of don't matter. Like, I remember freaking out about the bullets versus small paragraphs. Like, people will do different things and it honestly doesn't matter as long as you're getting your point across. And it's not anything crazy. Like, don't be writing a 2-paragraph essay, but it's shorter paragraph. Like, the small things truly don't matter. I know, like, I think even if someone had told me this, I probably would have done the exact same thing and like freaked out about the small things anyways, but like try to keep that in the back of your mind.
Sorry. ERAS is submitted during the sub-eyes, so if you can kind of get a head start on your personal statement and then like ERAS activities, like after step 2, that's pretty helpful, because I remember doing the ERAS stuff on my sub-eye and it was not fun. You could do it, but it's not the easiest.
Wednesday. It's also the submission deadlines for some reason are on Wednesday. Like I assumed Fridays, they were on Wednesdays, which should like, I knew, but did not know until like the week before, so just keep that in mind.
Couple of things, these are kind of nitty gritty, you'll worry about this in September more, but research items or like podium presentations count when other people present your podium. Like you'll see people with 10 podiums, they didn't go and present at 10 conferences, they're like mentors did, their coworkers did, but it goes in your CV, it counts as a research item. So people end up with like 30 research items, you know, they might have presented 5 of those posters and podiums. So that number is going to be larger than what you actually do. Another thing is we talked about letters a little bit. Try to get letters from whoever will write you one, because at the end of the day, you get to pick and choose where you send them. So on like application day, you're playing like, okay, well, this guy went to fellowship at Duke, I'm gonna send his letter to Duke. This guy did residency at Tufts, I'm gonna send this to Tufts. So just know that you can get them all and then do what you want with them when the time comes.
I tend to like overthink a lot, and I was on my rotation, and one of the career rotations, and the day before ERAS was due, I changed my personal statement around like 1 a.m. like completely. I was talking to one of my mentors, and I just took her advice because she said my original personal statement read like a CV. So I had 2 drafts, and I just completely changed it. So I think hindsight 2020, I would have like worked on it a little bit sooner instead of having to like rush with that and just submit it. But thankfully, it all worked out.
One kind of like specific thing, again, that will come up in September. I was like worried close to the deadline about your step scores being submitted, because there's like a small delay between the time you verify your application and the time your step scores get sent. I didn't know how long that was gonna take, but it was like 3 hours. So you don't need to worry about that as much as I did. And then Oh yeah, about kind of the one AM type thing, like the night before I was submitting, I was like going back through my signals, like, oh, do I really wanna, signal this place, signal that place? I ended up not changing anything, but I remember being up very late, like going back and forth in my head. So just anticipate that that might happen and just like have a firm list in place and then sure, if you wanna think about it, you're probably gonna think about it, but just like go back to like what you originally were thinking, at least that's what I had done. There might be like one or two programs that I could have gone either way on, in hindsight, but for the vast majority, I'd say 25 plus of the 30, I felt very comfortable with.
I just want to add just one thing. I think it was pretty unique with my ways that I had 2 weeks in between single one. Most had like back to back, right?
Yeah, I had 1 week free, cause when like the rotations are set on 4 week, we can talk about this when it comes time to schedule the ways, but they're usually set on 4 week blocks, and for some reason, one of those months always has like 5 weeks in it. So it throws off the rotation cycle, and this year happened to be the week of ERAS. So it helped.
Yeah, so I was saying that when I first selected my ways, I really wasn't looking at dates, but once I figured out, oh, I have 2 weeks in between each one, that's great. Grind for 4 weeks, have a 2 week break, can study again and then prep for the second one. But what ended up happening is that
I was looking for it too. I was so lost.
for my,
Yeah.
maybe please mute yourself. Thank you. So my second rotation, it started September 11th and ended October 6th. So remember, ERAS was due September 27th, I think. So I only had one, the only letter that I had was from Tufts, because that was my first rotation. I didn't have it from either two away rotations. So no one knew I rotated there besides those two programs. So that's something to think about when you're selecting your programs and to look at the dates.
Alright, our next question, in what ways did you gauge how competitive your application would be?
I think there's a couple ways to go about this. One, you could just, I think a talk like this is pretty helpful. I think that's what really, hit home for me personally, is just kind of, because you hear a lot about the national data and all of that. There's no closer applicant to you guys specifically than, the people who came here before you through Robert Wood. So I think looking at our internal data was definitely helpful. And then I'll say the second most important thing, or probably even more important, is getting feedback from mentors and to kind of just specify that sometimes you'll have mentors who truly do believe in you, and that's great, but sometimes the grass is kind of always green for them. So I just like Karen told you earlier with advice, take everything with a grain of salt. Sometimes if you have a quote unquote weaker application, and a mentor really pushes you and says, oh, you're gonna be great, you're gonna match whatever, you'll go wherever you want, just kind of like ask around, get different advice from different people, and then kind of look at all of that advice together and say, okay, well, this person said I'm the best applicant in the country, and this person told me I'm not gonna match, so where do I really stand? It's kind of compiling all that feedback and kind of, don't ever go through this alone. Also, the applicants who came before you, I was in constant contact with one or two people from the class above us, and kind of even throughout third year, throughout STEP, throughout, the application cycle, and kind of knowing that I trusted them, and I was able to share with them kind of, where I stood, and they gave me feedback about how, how that kind of fit in. So those were kind of the three ways I went about it.
This is like, it's a tough question because I don't think anyone is talking with each other about like, hey, this is my steps, but it's not the honors I got, and I don't think we should. I think talking to mentors is very important, but also remember, like, at the end of the day, you have to meet certain kind of like milestones, almost like you should have good grades, you should have at least average, more ideally above average step score, but at the end of the day, there's no real objective way to gauge how competitive you are. Again, sometimes it comes down to connections, who you know, like what kind of person you are, how well you fit in at the program, so make sure you have, and be like, part of it is like, check marks, like, are my grades good? Do I have, you know, good letters? Like, you have to have those things, but, I wouldn't like worry too much about, you know, I had 5 honors or 6 honors versus 7 honors, like as you saw, you know, on our PowerPoint. Again, talk to people though, and, yeah, I think I agree with kind of what Peter said, like, talk to a lot of different people. And kind of, it's like up to you really to like compile that advice, because there will be people who are gonna tell you, you're gonna match like wherever you want. And it's not that they're wrong, it's just like sometimes they're not as like in tune with like what the current application cycle is like. Like I have mentors who are now a few years into being attending, so they're like, they applied 7 years ago, and their advice, like even they'll say, I mean, even 7 years ago, it was not as competitive as it was now. So like your probably most valuable resources are like residents that are more younger, so like ones, interns, 2s and 3s, even like again 5s, like they might have more influence, so they might see applications, but they applied 5 years ago when it was less competitive. So just talk to a lot of people, but yeah, and not to worry too much.
Yeah, Peter put together some pretty significant data. If you look through the years, each year it gets a little bit more competitive. Step scores, research items, number of experiences, all that stuff. So that's a great slide to go back to those kind of, you know, see where you fall on those ranks. You don't need to be on the higher end of it. You just kind of need to be in the playing field. And I'll just echo what they were saying about staying in touch with junior residents and then kind of M4s that just graduated, stuff like that, because like on the interview trail, you meet so many applicants, you kind of size them up, see what works for them, see what didn't work for them, people are honest. And then, you know, we kind of have our hand on the pulse in terms of what the current application cycle is like, and we can kind of tell you where you stand. And I think we'll be honest in a non-judgmental way.
I'm not gonna say anything new here, so I'll just mention that I think your performance on your ways stand out a lot, and if anything, are just as important as anything else you got on your application. So as you saw in our class, 8 out of 10 of us matched where we rotated. Doesn't matter, like I know people that, you know, had amazing applications, but potentially weren't the best rotators, and they went unmatched this year. So just also on the flip side, if you have like a stellar application, you know, if you don't have the correct soft skills, just in terms of your attitude and work ethic, you potentially can go unmatched.
Only thing I'll add in terms of competitiveness that I used was the American Orthopedic Association CORD network, I believe it's called, CORD. Some program directors will publish what their interview criteria was in terms of like step scores, and then they'll publish like people that matched at their program step scores. That was just kind of a way for me to kind of see where I fit in different programs' eyes, so to speak.
Do you guys have access to Texas Star? Okay, that's a good one. So I used to use that a lot, just, for like numbers, but otherwise everything they said is spot on.
Next question is, what do you think was the strongest component of your specific application? I know, Peter, you showed the stats, what you guys thought. If you would like to expand it, was kind of more personal, please feel free, but
Yeah, I think the letters of rec were probably the biggest. Like everyone looks the same on paper, and like you're gonna meet all these people on the interview trail and meet the same people 10 times. And you realize that all your applications look exactly the same, the only difference is your letters. I'm sure Europe could all say the same thing. They asked about my letter writers by name. Some of them told me what the letter writer said in the letters on the interview. And for them to do that means that that person must have really liked me. And I'm sure you guys had similar experiences. So you're never going to see your letter unless somebody on an interview tells you about it. But I found that was the most impactful thing that I encountered when I was interviewing.
In terms of strength, I guess it could be subjective, but I guess one thing, like, the question is like something I was most proud of was some of the research work I had done, and that's something I talked about in pretty much every interview. So if there's anything like that, whether it be a research experience or a hobby that you did, it'll start coming up in conversation, and just be really passionate about talking about it, and be like happy and smile and be excited to share about it, and then people kind of grab onto that energy. And I feel like that's a good way to make a connection with people and kind of highlight, so to speak, strengths of your application, however you want to.
Yeah, you're applying to orthopedics, so most, people have like strong scores in research. And I was trying to figure out like what made me special, so for that, I thought my leadership, in college, I co-founded a chapter for, mentorship, and it's something I'm very passionate about. And then also did the same thing here at Robert Wood. And then in addition to that, my letter of recommendation, I would say, as PJ recently mentioned at one of my interviews, at most of my interviews, they brought up the letter that I had from Tufts from the PD, so I wrote through the PD and chair there, so that helped a lot. And then also at one of my interviews, my mentor trained the chair at the program I was interviewing at. And I didn't make the connection, but as I was leaving that interview with the chair, he said, so-and-so wrote you a strong letter. So you never know like where connections can take you. So that's why you always have to tap into your network.
Yeah, I'll kind of answer this in the way that I think is probably like the strongest part about my application. I did 8 weeks of orthopedic elective time as an M3. I did 4 at Robert Wood, 2 at another institution, 2 at another institution. They were like individualized design elective, like IDEs. This was good because it kind of puts you in a new environment, kind of is like a pre-OA, and you work with a mentor, you get a letter. So I think that experience kind of just sets you to have success on away rotation, because like the first day of sub-I is not a time for you to learn. So I think M3 electives go a long way.
Yeah, same thing as everyone else letters. I was lucky to have like a mentor that I've known for like several years, which is like, it's hard to have that, without like just being honestly like chance. So I like, it's not like advice to give to you really, but it's like, I think having letter writers that have known you the longest. So again, for you guys, I'd probably most likely someone from here or from other places that you like reached out to do research with. So hold on to your, like, that's the other thing actually, like hold on to connections. Like if you do like an M1 summer, ortho program or something, when you meet someone that you really clicked with, and like hold on to that connection, like check in with them, see if they want to do other research, just kind of talk to them every once in a while to kind of let them know how you are doing, not just like casually, but like in terms of like ortho, like, school stuff. So hang on to those connections and paper letters.
I'll keep this brief, but yeah, letters for sure, like everyone just said, give you guys a unique perspective since I'm staying at Robert Wood, but, on my Robert Wood interview, I think I walked into every room and almost every single attending knew who I was just by the nature of, kind of the work that I put into establishing my connections and my network here over the 4 years. And people have different perspectives, like a couple of people just mentioned they had strong mentorship outside, and, everyone's unique, everyone has their own way. I think majority of my mentorship came through Robert Wood. And I think that really reflected on interview day and kind of like the vibe that I walked into. And the way that it was just super relaxed, super like conversational, like pretty much didn't get asked any questions because we're not reinventing the wheel. If they've known you for some time now, there's nothing else they need to see. So I think that's kind of one thing that's not technically on the application, but I think, if you have an interest that, in staying home, or even if it's at another institution that you have super strong ties to, and you've worked with a lot of their faculty throughout 3 or 4 years or something like that, you're gonna walk in and you're gonna see that's gonna reflect on your interview experience overall.
Our next question is, what tools did you use to develop a strong personal statement?
Do it early, have as many people look at it as possible. I think I sent it to a couple residents, 2 or 3 attendings overall. Everyone that I asked for a letter, I would send them my personal statement here and on the ways, just so that to get continuous feedback. And then I think something really interesting that you should all do is that send it to people outside of medicine. I had a lawyer look at it. I had a friend who has, just chill, whatever, who knows me really well, and kind of almost someone mentioned this earlier, is that, the person who knew me really well said, like, this is a great personal statement, but it's not really highlighting, like, who you are, your personality. Like, I want you to make this more personal because you're the person that I know, you've got a lot great things listed here, but like, it's not reflecting your personality, and I think that ultimately made a difference, so just do it early, like PJ said, and then, kind of have as many people look at it as possible.
I agree with that. The other thing is also, most people do not have some like extremely exceptional story, you know, like, like, there are ortho applicants, like you will meet them, who are like literally former Olympian athletes or like were in the NFL. Literally like in the NFL. So like, there are people like that whose personal statements probably will actually stand out because they can talk about being in the NFL or being an Olympian athlete, like gold medalist something. You're probably not that person. I don't know, maybe there's a few maybe out there, but like, if you're not that person, that's okay, as long as what comes off is that you are genuinely like passionate about orthopedics, that you're like a normal person, that you work. I think like that's what's more important. If you happen to have some kind of exceptional story, that's also awesome and that will definitely benefit you, but don't like come up with something, or okay, like obviously don't come up with anything, but don't like, you know, over exaggerate something, just so that you have some kind of special story, in your like personal statement, just like be genuine. And have it come through that like you love orthopedics, that you work really hard, and this is truly like what you want to do with your life. And if that is through an exceptional story, great. If it's not, that's totally fine. Like 90% of the personal statements are all gonna sound the same. Everyone tore their ACL in like playing high school sports, you know, so like, that's fine. Just like have it be genuine and like show off that, you know, show off your best qualities basically, and that's what matters.
Yeah, it's very hard for your personal statement to make your application. It's very easy for it to break your application. So you don't want to take chances. Be safe, be generic if you need to be. If you have a special story, tell it. Another little, you're asked for a little, you get to submit different personal statements to different programs. Don't write 60 different personal statements, but if you have like a personal experience at one of your rotations and you want to talk about that in your personal statement, well, you send it to that place. That is something that you can do and probably should do just to show them you care about them.
Just use Grammarly, that's one thing like I'll add. You know, these people have to look at hundreds of applications. You don't want to have some major grammatical error, and they just move on to the next application. And there was you just brought up a good point about how you can submit different personal statements. There was a program, there's like 4 of them in New York. Like,
Norwalk.
yeah, one of the Norfolk programs I applied to, I forget which one.
It's like individualized.
Yeah, but exactly. And one of them wanted to know, like, why do you want to apply here? So I had to include like a paragraph on top of my original personal statement and submit it only to them. And I had to triple check that it was only to them. And so that, if I did, then everyone would receive that.
Yeah, as far as tools, same thing, just had a lot of people read it. And to echo that specifically, look at all the programs' websites in September. You know, if you do it too early too, like in July, August, you might not catch it, but I looked at them in September to see, like, did they have a specific thing like that? Do they want a certain letter a certain way, or do they want a specific personal statement? It wasn't many programs, but there were a few, especially a few that I signaled that had a specific thing, so just make sure you budget the time accordingly to have, like, I pretty much kept my statement the same, but then like at the last paragraph, I kind of twisted it to address what they wanted, like, why do you want to come here?
1 page. So it's not 1 page on a Word doc, 1 page in ERAS. So when you upload it to ERAS, make sure you preview it, because 1 page on a Word doc is not 1 page of ERAS. Just keep that in mind.
Are there any extracurriculars other than just like standard, your college, your research, or volunteer that you think help bolster your application? Anything special?
Yeah, I would, like, if you did something that's like not that, like anything else, like if you're an EMT, like I was a lifeguard, somebody else went across to the military, like if you did things that are unique, that is mostly what they're gonna ask you about on interviews, and I found that was kind of like the way to break into like a program or something, like the people like that type of person. If it's not you, it's not you, but I would try to like highlight at least 1 or 2 things that you did that are like not clubs, research, volunteering, like whether that's undergrad or something else in med school. I know that's tough, but having that one thing on your app that's pretty like thorough and you really enjoy is something that they're gonna really look at, and ask you about a lot, because a lot of them don't ask you about like all the basic stuff, unless it's like a themed room or something.
In terms of extracurriculars, I did include some things from college, like sports and I was a musician, so I included that. One other kind of unique thing was I didn't even dedicate a whole like hobby section, but in one of my like athletics things, I just said other interests kind of at the bottom of the paragraph. I just said, you know, swimming, blah, blah, blah. One of them was drone flying. So I got asked about that in an interview. So just like stuff like that, you don't know. It came up in like maybe one or two, so maybe most of the people that looked at the application didn't even see it or care, but you know, that one person that did, maybe make a connection with them.
Yeah, like I said before, I think I'm passionate for mentorship. In almost every single interview, they ask me at least two questions. Well, one, do you have anything that you want to say? And then two, I have to see 50 of you today. What is one thing you want to leave with? And that was kind of like sell yourself. So that's when I would talk about something on my application that I thought stood out for me compared to the other applicants.
I put a job I had in college, I used to work at Wawa, came up in a lot of interviews that might hear about it, so you might not, it's just conversational.
I don't think there was anything specific, but one piece of like slightly controversial advice that I've gotten that I personally did not do was like leave something off of your application, because people will actually ask you, tell me something about yourself that's not on your application. In like retrospect, I kind of wish I had left something off just so I had an answer to that question, because I feel like I spent, you know, whatever, a month, 2 months, like putting everything about me in the application, and then people would ask like, what's something that's not on it? So like some people have like left off like have hobbies or interests, just have something to like bring up, say like, oh, like this isn't on my thing, on my application, but here's something I can talk about for 10 minutes. So that's actually like, I didn't do it, but I actually think that was like kind of good advice. It doesn't have to, like, obviously don't exclude like research or like important things, but if there's like one small thing about yourself that maybe you don't want to be the focus of your application, but you can actually talk about, I actually would agree with that statement, so.
I think one unique thing for me, which I didn't play on, but I guess came up a lot from the interviewer's perspective, was I did a couple of medical missions in Haiti and Zambia, and then a lot of interviewers just kind of like harped on that and wanted to know more. One interview social, I walked in and the PD like recognized who I was. She's like, oh my God, you went to Zambia, right? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, tell me about it. And then we talked. She's like, I have to bring you to this resident. Was like an upcoming chief. She's like, he's going to Zambia next month. You guys have to talk, whatever. And then she like connects me with him, and we end up talking for like 20 minutes about that. So it's just kind of the little things that whatever is unique to you, don't force things, don't make things up, don't whatever. If you have something that's honest and builds to your story, then include it.
All right, next question, deciding, who to ask for lowers, when should you do it while you're on the ways, and should you have a non-ortho go on?
I'm gonna quickly touch on the last part, non-ortho letters. I don't think anyone here have it. Right. Okay, so one person. I don't know if any programs specifically asked for one, maybe in the north.
Yeah, I just had a letter from internal medicine just because it's did well and I vibed with my attending. But UCSF was the program that asked for a non-ortho letter.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think the Northeast, so if that's in your plans, then maybe not like that important, but I guess elsewhere in the country is probably more prominent. But when should you ask? I think I literally got this answer from one of the people on last year's panel. They said if you're on a 2-week rotation, you know, most rotations are 4 weeks. It's either you're gonna be 2 weeks on one service, 2 weeks on a second service versus 4 weeks on one service. It's always kind of like the halfway point. You introduce it, like Karen said, and then by the end of your time is when you officially ask. So if you're on a 2-week service, kind of at the end of that first week, which sounds crazy, but again, these people expect it. It's not weird. Just kind of bring up the ideas, like, you know, I had a great week. Do you have any feedback? You know, I just wanted to give you a heads up that, you know, I'll be working with you. Next week's our last week, and hopefully at the end, I'll be asking you for a letter. Just kind of like throw the idea in there, and they'll be like, yeah, of course, like let's schedule a time to talk. Or another way you could ask is, hey, next week's our last week together. Do you mind if we schedule a meeting to just kind of talk about the rotation? And then for me to ask some questions and then they'll kind of understand. And then again, if it's a 4 week, then you might want to do this 2 weeks in once they have a better idea of, who you are. And then, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. One thing to ask was literally my first time asking for a letter outside of Robert Wood on my first away. I like did everything I just told you guys, and then on the last day when I was like actually asking the letter writer, I was like, would you mind writing me a letter of recommendation? He's like, wrong. I was like, my heart dropped. And then he was like, that's not how you ask. And he was like giving me good advice. He's like, in the future, when you guys bring this up, I want you to say, would you be able to write me a strong letter about recommendation? And I think, it's something subtle, but it really sells home the point. If you see the person that you ask kind of hesitant or, like kind of take their time or I'll get back to you or whatever, kind of read the room. Even if they end up writing you one, like Usman said, you'll have all those letters and you could decide what to do with it later, but just kind of use the verbiage and kind of anticipate their feedback and kind of decide later what you want to do with that.
Yeah, everything you said basically, I agree with. One thing is, it's sometimes it's tricky because, sometimes it's literally, I mean, orthopedic surgeons are very busy. Sometimes you'll ask them, hey, like, can we set up a meeting? And they'll be like, yeah. And like, they just won't reply to you after that. And sometimes like, it's tricky because you kind of, again, it's like a little bit about reading the room sometimes because they don't want to write you one and like, you shouldn't use it. And sometimes it's because they're genuinely just really, really busy. And like, they barely have time, like for their families, like let alone sit down with you to have a conversation about a letter. So like, again, just kind of read the room, like think about your rotation, talk to the resident that, is on service with you about like, hey, like, I asked this person for a letter, what do you think? And they usually have a good idea. Like, I remember asking my resident and he was kind of like, yeah, he's just really busy. Like, don't worry about it. It'll be a fine letter. Just like, so like, read the room is my advice.
I don't have too much more to say. 2 weeks you work with one attending. At the end of the first week you ask. The second week they will think you a little bit more. They want to assess you. They want to write about you. So expect that. And one advice I got was if you get a letter from an institution, you kind of have to at least send it to that institution. So don't just willy-nilly get letters. Get it from people you think like you.
Only thing I want to say is just ask your residents, how you're performing for any feedback, because more likely the attending will ask the resident how they perform.
Their clinic, I feel like is another time you have a chance to get some one-on-one time with the attending, get to present patients to them. So I feel like that was another good opportunity to get more exposure with them, so you felt more comfortable asking for a letter.
Yeah, I think that's everything.
Okay, perfect. We only have about 8 minutes left and want to be respectful to everyone's time. We're scheduled for 8:30. So if you guys have any questions in the room, please feel free to ask now. So we're going to give you that chance to do that.
We're happy to stay after too. Just if you want to come down and
Yeah, we want to make sure that people here get their questions asked. I know that there's these pre-templated questions, but I know other people really want to know certain things, so go for it.
Congratulations, first of all, to all you for the match. I'm sure it's a long journey from M1. I just wanted to know kind of when did you start making your connections? I know, Peter, you mentioned you kind of started here, how early on, like maybe before you get into your rotations, like as an M1 or an M2, kind of what did you do to start networking around?
Yeah, I think that definitely, so advice that I wish I had when I was at M1, I kind of met a mentor out of the blue, like a cold email him and it worked out and it was great, but I kind of wish I knew where I wanted to target as an M4. So what institution do I want to go to? What city do I want to live in? And then I would have probably targeted that institution and then try to get a mentor that way, because you realize how important a mentor is getting you into a program. Like we said before, everyone's super competitive. So that was one way, that was like one advice that I wish I had. I don't know if you guys want to share. I don't want to take the whole time.
I would say, I think when I got here, I'm from Boston originally, so I didn't know anyone here. This is actually my first time living outside state. But anyways, I reached out to one of the residents who matched at Harvard from here. And I said, like, who's your mentor at this program? And she told me, Dr. Partland. So I reached out to Dr. Partland, and he's been my guy since day one. And so that's something that I personally did. And then after that, it's through research and what PJ mentioned about how important mentors are when it comes to applying. This is like a conversation I'm sure we'll have later when you actually start to submit your ERAS application. But I asked my mentors, do you know of anyone at these programs that I'm thinking about signaling? They told me yes or no, and I said they'll do their best to like reach out. And it may sound taboo, but almost everyone that I know does it. And so this is why networking is extremely important. And even the same thing with OAs. The way I thought about it is I would rather rotate at a place where one, I like the program and my mentor happens to know someone at the program. So if I crush it, I know not only like had a great performance, but also my mentor can speak highly on my behalf, in addition to the person that I rotated with.
To kind of answer your timeline question, you know, you want to get to know people as early as you can. You want to go to Thursday resident clinic as early as you can, just hang out with chiefs, learn from them. But if that doesn't happen, you know, you decide, oh, it's halfway through attempt 2, attempt 3 now, I'm deciding more of it. Take a year, you know, it's like the norm now. So a lot of people do it, gives yourself more time, you get a great letter out of it, and you get some nice research time. Just, you know, keep that in mind if you are on the later side.
I think a good way to start getting involved is through residents. Attendings, it's a little bit more intimidating sometimes, and a lot of times, like I said before, like, it's not that they don't want to talk to you, they're just genuinely really busy. So a good way is to like talk with residents. I mean, you guys are lucky, like you're gonna have Peter. You're gonna know him. So, so like, you know, it helps. I think like I started working with Todd, who's now a 5, but he was like a 3, and that was like my main way of getting to know the department here. So like, and you know, we started on like one little project together. You know, it doesn't have to be big. It's just trying to get maybe involved with the residents, because also, especially at Robert Wood, we work a lot with like, residents, especially doing your ways and things like that. So, and I believe they will tell like, don't forget, like, you know. Like, you know, they'll talk with each other about like, hey, this person like really works hard, stuff like that. So, try to get involved with the residents here. I mean, also obviously a good idea to have some attendings, who know your name and like know that you're working on this project with them, but residents are really a good resource.
I think for me, so I didn't know I wanted to do orthopedics coming into medical school, and I didn't really have that interest build up until like kind of halfway through M1. And then it really started to, you know, become more real towards the end of M1. So at that time, I was like past the time where people were applying for all these summer research things and all that. So I started to scramble, and I was like talking to Dr. McPartland, talking to some of the attendings here. And at the time, Dr. McPartland called me up and he's like, you know, Dr. Cott, who you guys all know, it's like he's coming back as volunteer faculty and his research intern is just finishing up. I'm going to connect you with him. And then he calls him, mentions my name, and then ever since then, me and Dr. Cott have like worked a lot, whether it's research, he's worked with almost every single one of us. But then also I think the orthopedic group and a lot of the things that eBoard has done over the past 4 years while we've been here. So that was kind of like one way to build connections with the attendings. And then, like I said, I was still looking for research for the summer. So I went to one of the research meetings on, you know, one of those quarterly research meetings. And at the time I went up to Dr. Gatt after, because I still hadn't figured anything out. I was like, Dr. Gatt, you know, I really want to do some research over the summer. I want to utilize my time. Do you have any recommendations? I'm kind of behind on all these programs. It's like, you know, Dr. Dunn has a PhD student in the lab right now. Why don't you email him and CC me on that email? And all I did was, at the time, I had never spoken to Dr. Gatt. I was just there on a Thursday. And I think I was one of like a couple of us who were there. And I guess that was good enough for him to see that I was present. And then he endorsed me to Dr. Dunn. I ended up working in the research lab over the summer. And kind of, again, that was my way of connecting with more faculty. And of course, Dr. Gatt, who also runs the lab, started to, you know, recognize who I was and things like that. And there's different research groups within the department that you guys could join and, you know, be active in. Even Dr. Dunn, it was funny, I worked with him kind of technically that whole summer. I never met the man until interview day when I walked in and he was in the room with Dr. Gat, because it was like during COVID time, so he was away from the lab. And he like recognized the name, he goes, I've never seen you before, but it's, being present, being work, not necessarily, or doing work, not necessarily to be recognized, but just being present will go a long way.
One question I have is, I know PJ mentioned that, he like cold emailed a mentor and that's where he got connected with him. How would you guys recommend like cold emailing and going up to someone you don't know per se, but you want to like sort of get involved with their work? How would you say, like, do you ask them if you want to like speak more about it, if you have questions, or what, how do you kind of phrase that?
One thing I found, like working with individuals, like you're gonna learn, you're gonna meet like a lot of people, and I don't know, like I was always somebody that was also kind of like a little uncomfortable meeting a new person, like I didn't know how upfront to be with them. But I found that you need to, like, the more prepared you are, the more direct you are with things, the easier it is to get a response, because you gotta cut through like the BS. So what I would recommend you do, or anyone, if you're gonna cold email somebody, I want to research. So I drafted an email, I said, I introduced myself, I said, this is who I am, this is where I am, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to help you. And I told them what I would do for them, and I attached my CV. And I said, you want to reach out, here's my phone number, here's my email, and I'll do that. So like they already had all the information they needed. So if they're interested in me, they're gonna call me. If they're not, move on to the next one. So I'll just be pretty direct with it.
So I think most of us, like threes, are in the process of applying to Waze right now and choosing where to go. So how did you decide like what institutions, what kind of like tier or like what kind of reputability of the institutions you're picking? And how do you gauge competitiveness or not gauge before step 2? So we're all pre-step 2.
I think that answer is gonna be unique to every single person, and I think we kind of mentioned this before, is just be honest with yourself about exactly what you want. If you're, if reputation is important to you, that's fine, that's what you are going for, then, look into those programs and realize that you might need higher scores, you might need higher pubs, you might need more research, you might need to do it ways at more prestigious quote unquote programs. If geography, which if you're asking my personal answer, geography was everything. So my family, my community, my support system is all here in Jersey. I didn't want to go too far away, so I exclusively rotated through New York City and then one program in Philly. And I knew that's what I wanted. And then after that, it was kind of more so figuring out like, well, I want one small program, one big academic program, one more private-demic, but so things like that, just kind of trying different things out. So I think that's how I personally went about it, to kind of keep it brief. In terms of gauging your competitiveness, one thing that I kind of like tell M3s, I know it's really hard now without step 2, especially happening until the end. Without step 1. So I think going through third year, you're gonna get feedback on your rotations about your performance. So that's one thing, if you're constantly being told you're a bad rotator, you're not meeting expectations, you're falling short, you're not submitting things on time, etc. It's kind of gonna carry forward. On the contrary, you're getting a lot of good feedback about, your performance, your work ethic. Forget your knowledge, right? Like performance, work ethic, your personality, things like that. People laugh at you, you get to connect with residents even outside of the field you're interested in, that's also going to carry forward, right? So gauge those things. And then when it comes to like true score, I think if you look at your shelf percentiles, if you've been, let's say, scoring in the 50th percentile all year, maybe you'll be around 50th, probably more, right? If you work really hard for step 2 and you really want to bring up your number, right? Or if you're, you've been in the 90th percentile all year, chances are you're not going to drop off to the 10th percentile on your step score, So there's objective and subjective measures out there throughout third year, and just kind of look at that holistically and try to figure it out, but while also asking advice from mentors.
Yeah, just briefly to pick where you want to go. I mean, like I was in a relationship, like my girlfriend matched Pete, so that was huge for me. We wanted to stay in the Northeast, like Peter said. looking at programs that have RWJ students is like pretty huge. So they're like a great asset, and I only rotated in places that RWJ people match it. That wasn't something that like everyone did, but for me, I thought that was my best shot, because I had a lot of stake, I need to stay here. Otherwise, the grade, what we do.
One note about like, staying at places, so a few programs that like specifically made this comment to me is like, they're like, we take one of you guys and now there's like 5 of you rotating here at every single block or something like that. So like, yes, 100% like where Robert Wood students go is a valuable resource, but this is like, I know there's 2 people at NYU, this is not the time for every single person applying orthopedics this year to go to NYU, like.
But you should think about it.
Yeah, like they're
Yeah, I
not, I'm
guess.
not saying that they're gonna like not take you because there's already 2 Robert Wood people, but like, just, if they're like, they're not gonna take 5 more, right? Like, they're gonna take maybe 1 more, maybe 2 more, so just, think about these things. Yeah, one other thing that, for competitiveness and things like that, I think there's a lot of things that not one thing will make you kind of like, you need to have your research, you need to have all of these things to be a competitive applicant. And the unfortunate reality is, ortho is so competitive that one thing kind of can break you. So if you have everything pretty, like, if you're, let's say, like, if you have decent grades, decent everything, and then you completely bomb step 2, like, that could be the thing that breaks you. You could have, everything and 0 research, like, that could be the thing that breaks you. So I think it's really tricky because it's so competitive nowadays, but I think meet kind of like those milestones, like have good grades, have research, have some research, have, good letters, and then from there, maybe kind of start thinking about, things. So like, I would honestly assume that like most people applying orthopedics have honors in almost all, if not all, rotations. So if you're not one of those people, doesn't mean you're not a competitive applicant and can't match well, but maybe don't do, again, 3 of the top programs, just because there are 100 people that do have 100% honors rotations, so I also personally took the approach of, 3 like very differently sized programs. 1 in Maryland, and like 2 in the city, because I also wanted to stay here, and then I did kind of a range of whole like prestige, I guess. So I think that's like a good way to do it, and I have heard a lot of people do it that way. I also have like a really good friend who is like a superstar applicant and did 3 OAs in like 3 top programs, and then matched out her number 1, which is like another top program that wasn't one of her OAs. So it, it really like, everyone is different, so it's really hard to generalize, but just, you guys will be with me.
My quick spiel about ways, anesthesiology, internal medicine, they have like 7 signals, but like then I have 3 gold signals. Ortho doesn't officially have gold signals, but in a way it's functionally a gold signal. So you telling a place I really want to be here, you should treat it almost like a signal. Those 30 signals, when September comes, you're gonna do like 10 targets, 10, there's no safety in orthopedics, but 10 programs you might consider lower tier, and then 10 reaches. You could do your ways similarly, like I'll do a reach, I'll do a target, I'll do like a lower tier program. That's probably the safest way to play it. Again, these things are very, very, very important. You don't just want to do top 10 doximity rotations. That doesn't work out well for people.
I will just add, in terms of ways that, as you're thinking about it now, in March it's not uncommon that you can't add one later. So if you don't get your first choice or the scheduling doesn't work out, I schedule them as late as like July for like a September or October. So if it's not all coming into place right now, just know that you'll be able to navigate it and figure it out. As has been mentioned, like there are some programs that are gonna have like, hundreds of people apply to rotate there, and maybe that one's a little more competitive, but for every program like that, there's some more, maybe smaller programs that people don't, as heavily rotate at, and you'll be more than welcome at programs like that to see and experience, so that's also a fair game too.
Yeah, I wanted to do, what everyone already mentioned, I sort of want to do like a blue collar, like a mix blue collar, white collar, and then white collar, but some blue collar as well. And then also different program sizes, just to see which environment was the best for me, because I've only known Rutgers, in terms of like, 3 visits per year, and more so on the blue collar side of things. And like I said, since we're from Boston, I heard great things about us, but I didn't want to do 2 in Boston because I thought it's too much. So I decided to do, Tufts and then, Yale. And then with Rush, I wanted to do at least one top 10. However, mostly everyone in my class wanted to go to the NYU. And I was like, I just didn't have that strong of affinity to New York. I just like live. So I said, I'd rather live in a major city, and I decided on Rush. So for those that, may not want to be in the New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania area, it doesn't hurt to rotate somewhere else. You also can think about it on the flip side. I mean, we're just being honest, instead of competing with your classmates, you may only have one Robert Wood student there that they get to see. You don't compare them to another Robert Wood student. And then on the flip side, like Karen mentioned, you really have to know your application. I had a friend who rotated at Mayo, Columbia, and Rush, and he matched at Mayo. So you just gotta like know your application at the end of the day. Like if you know that you all like have it all, then like, it was your oyster.
One really quick thing I wanted to add about OAs is what you don't wanna do is apply to 10 OAs and then like reject 7 of them. I've been told, like, there's no official like blacklist situation where like if you accept and then reject, like they'll officially blacklist you, but the general thing that I've heard is that if you accept an OA rotation and then tell them later that you don't wanna come, like a lot of people have not gotten interviews from that place, even when they were really competitive applicants. So pick the OAs carefully. It's gonna be really, like, I personally applied exactly 3 OAs. And it was really nerve wracking because one of them didn't tell me until like 2 months before that I was going there. So like for those 3 months, I was like, if I don't get this one, I'm gonna have to find it away in like July when everything's already full. Like it's going to be nerve wracking, but for the most part, always do work out. Like, so just like that is the better approach than like, if you feel really, really nervous, maybe apply to a fourth, but if just remember that if you get rejected from it, or sorry, if you get accepted from it and then you rejected, you might not get an interview from that place, so be aware.
So one thing I'll add to that, we're talking about numbers, the more the merrier. The DO kids, they have it much tougher than us. Some of them do 5 OAs on top of their home rotation. That's 6 orthopedic CLIs. That's, that takes a toll on your body. I did 5 total. A lot of us did 5 total. The more the merrier. And for Wilsac, I have to say you after match, but it's worth it because I'm matched.
Yeah, I will say, I did 1 home and 3 OAs. I will say that was my personal limit. I did not really, I mean, like, in retrospect, I wish I had the energy to do a fourth, but realistically, by the end of my third, I was like not living in your home, like living in Airbnbs and out of like a suitcase, like working 16-hour days for like 3 months. Again, while not living in your home takes like a huge toll. And I think by my last OA, like I was like, completely done. So like, yes, if you can do 4, and you think you'll be able to handle that, go for it. But remember that like, it's not just like the physical toll that this is taking, like this is like the thing that we're talking about where you're being watched like 24/7. So it's not just like, oh, I'm tired. Like you're gonna be tired as residents, you're gonna have to do it for 5 years. But it's the part where like, people are kind of like watching you again, I don't want to scare you, but like people are kind of watching you and like you really have to be at like 120% for those 3 months. So doing that for 4 months straight, I think probably was not like feasible for me, but this is again where you have to be a little realistic. I personally would really recommend.
So when I was on elective, one of our faculty gave me advice about like when picking OAs, there are some programs that have just one general app for their entire program, but others will break it down by service. Like some schools might have like a specific joints app or trauma and so on. This attending told me that like to kind of like make yourself look better, to apply for, if they have the option to break it down into services, to apply to things that you've seen. So if you've been on joints, peds, trauma, or have significant exposure to those, it'd be better to apply to those. If you guys follow that advice, do you feel like it matters or not really? Like, I don't know if you guys get to request a service when you're on, like, if you apply to one that's just a general overall app.
I think it's a yes and no. They're the pros, you gotta weigh the benefits and the cons to everything, right? So if you stay on the same services for, all your weight rotations, yes, you'll be more knowledgeable, you'll be more proficient, but maybe not necessarily the attendings at every single one of these institutions on that same service matter as much per se. So one other approach is which you could kind of mix in is to reach out. So like at all the rotations that I did, I would try to talk to someone. If I had an option of, you know, choosing the service, talk to someone who's there. Actually for all my ways, I talked to someone who had at least rotated or is a resident or something related to that, which I highly recommend for everyone here. Don't pick anything blindly. But you could ask them, like, you know, is there an attending or is there someone that matters more? Or is there someone that writes really good letters, for example, and kind of take that in and try different things out. And one thing that I also heard while on a way is that, you know, like if you're doing this for 4 or 5 months, sometimes you may see a rare case or something that you might not see honestly for all of residency, or maybe once or twice. So kind of getting that exposure as a sub-I where it's a low stress environment or it's stressful environment, but it's, you know, you're not the resident performing the surgery for whatever. You might be able to see a lot more. So try things out. It's a good early way to kind of know what you like and what you don't like as well.
One thing I'll say is the coordinators are very, very important. You should be friendly with them. You can reach out to them beforehand, request a certain service if you want to be on sports, like they're gonna be the person that puts you on sports. Same thing for interviews, like you have to be really nice to the coordinators. If you know them, that goes a long way. Something else I'll say about being on the same services, at some point, all the sports attendings are gonna ask you the same questions. So if you know sports really well, sports pimp really well, you're gonna look better on the third way on sports. Again, it gets redundant, you miss out on some learning opportunities, but it's the safer way to do it.
Actually, one of the current interns, Robert Willard, gave me this advice. I try to get on services without like the PD chair or APD. So that's at Tufts, I was with the chair and PD at Yale. All the chair, PD and APD are all Peds. So I was with them as well, but at Rush, I didn't. And the way I just thought about it, if I just do well, I mean, you know, the chair and PD, the option for you. That's not to say if you don't, obviously if you don't get on their service, they all talk. So either way, you know, you gotta do well, but that's just the way I look at it. And also, I never experienced hand, and I was sort of interested in it, and that's why I applied for hand. I wasn't trying to say, hey, like, I'm seeing this the most, I wanna get on this service. Yeah, there are pros to it, but also learn, it's a great way just to learn about other subspecialties.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, just as Lorette just alluded to, like, I think for a lot of my ways, I did like sports, so I saw that a few times, and like Usman said, that is helpful from a knowledge standpoint. But if there was like a service, like I saw spine for the first time on the way, and like, I was like, oh crap, I'm not gonna know anything, I'm not gonna look good, but it helped me learn in that moment, and then the next time I saw spine, I was that much more prepared, so just embrace the opportunity to do a lot of away rotations. I think one of the coolest and most unique aspects of fourth year and doing all these aways, you get to see 4 or 5 different institutions, how they do things similarly and differently. And like, that's an opportunity you'll never get again in your life. So embrace that, enjoy it, get to be in a new place for a month and just try to, you know, work hard, but to just kind of embrace and acknowledge like, yeah, this is cool, this is what I want to be doing. And if you're on that spine service that you didn't get to see before, like, I really wanted to rotate with the PD on hand, but you didn't have a chance to, just know that you'll end up making the most out of it no matter what.
One last thing I wanna say, if you, I didn't mention this, but diversity scholarships are a thing. If you are a female applicant, we have this diversity here, so, I got one, it was like great, it helps with like paying for aways and things like that, so, definitely like look out for them. Certain institutions have, some institutions have them specifically for ortho, other institutions have them like for, like other, or like for the entire like institution sometimes, so keep your eye out for those, and applications are probably happening like now or in the next month or so, so. Keep your eye out for those.
I think we're gonna wrap up. Thank you guys so much. Congratulations, first of all, and thank you for taking the evening to come talk to us. Thank you guys for attending here on Zoom. We will circulate the slides and I'll see if there's any contacts I can share. And yeah, thank you.
Yes. Personal stuff you wanna ask, we're here.
We'll stick around if you guys have any specific personal questions.